Hello, YouTube. I thought I'd do a little reaction vlog to what happened a couple of days ago, which was the Chauvin trial, the Chauvin verdict, where the jury basically returned a verdict of guilty for Chauvin in, I think it was murder in the second degree, murder in the third degree, and if memory serves, uh, manslaughter. And what my reaction was. Um, I did a take of this before and it wasn't emotional enough. And I think I have to have a little bit more gravity. But the thing is, this doesn't really make me happy. I mean, I'm somewhat sanguine about it, but I'm also kind of sad about it because the trial. I mean, realistically, let's be honest. I'm not going to say that he didn't deserve a trial, but I don't really know what kind of a trial you do. First of all, it took a long time uh, to see him prosecuted. Um, Second, it really should not have taken that long. I mean, it should have been like over in 72 hours. And it took a long time, and you had to get a lot of witnesses out, and you had to get a lot of experts out. And I don't know if I want to rehash what happened in the trial, but basically, his defense kind of fell apart because, uh, Floyd was around for a while, and it's not like he was taking, meaning he was literally sitting there waiting. So it wasn't like he was taking fentanyl right then and there, as he knew the cops were approaching. So that didn't make any sense. And it turns out that the state provided evidence that Floyd's intake was roughly consistent with people that they had caught during DUI stops, which meant people were awake enough to drive. And if you know anything about fentanyl, you know that if you cross the line of lethal dose, you're not going to be walking around. And there's no such thing as someone who can actually get used to the lethal dose. That doesn't happen. The lethal dose is the lethal dose. The police actually lied about that and said that he had twice the lethal dose. That was a lie. The original press release about the incident was also completely a lie. And anyway, when that fell apart, when it turns out that the dosage that he had in his bloodstream was consistent with somebody who would be staying conscious and alive and alert, then it fell upon Chauvin to sort of say, well, I was merely following orders. What I was doing was well within department policy. So as soon as his supervisor went on the stand to say no, what he did went beyond department policy, department parameters, well, then his goose was cooked. But that took entirely too long. I mean, really, you could have done all that within a day. My point is that when it comes to convicting a cop, it's really almost like it's Herculean, like cleaning the Aegean stables. I mean, it's really, really difficult. So, I mean, that's my first point. My second point is this is an outlier. This is a rarity for reasons I'm going to get into later. But I think there was a guy. I forget, his name escapes me right now. Um, he's over at Bowling Green State University, and I think his name is Stinson, maybe Philip Stinson. He did a study that since 2005, an officer involved fatal shootings. Since 2005, there have been 7 convictions. Okay, 7 convictions. In other words, that's around a 1 in 2,000 chance. Even if you're a family member, even if you get the uh, charges, even if you prosecute a police officer, even if you get to that stage, there's only about a 1 in 1,000 chance that you will successfully convict that officer. It is very, very rare, and this is definitely an exception because, of course, you had the video that everybody saw, you had a pretty clear-cut violation of department policy because the guy was unconscious for a long time, and the police officer kept his knee there. So it's really, really hard when you've got your knee on the guy's neck and you're blocking medical rescue to make some stupid argument. Okay, but now I'm rehashing the case. But it's really hard to make that, that to say, well, I followed department policy or whatever. But as I said, it's a pretty rare. It's an outlier. It's a pretty rare case where there was a successful conviction. But part of the problem here is, I mean, people are going to take this politically. So, I mean, the Republicans are in the wilderness, so they're neither here nor there. They're off the deep end. But some of the Democrats are going to take this and talk about reform. So let me tell you why I'm not for reform, because reform is not what we need to go after here. That's not the issue. The issue is, how do we stop the police from doing this without doing the usual things that people have said are police reform, things like training, etc. There have been studies about how giving giving the police better training, trying to increase their sensitivity on racial issues, increasing community policing. There have been some studies on that, and what they've shown is, number one, they've all failed. The programs have failed. Number two, the police and the various organs within the police department, not just the regular police department, but the police academy and the trainers there, and the captains and the officers, all oppose reform. They resist reform. They don't believe that they need to be reformed. Okay? And they scoff at the sensitivity training, etc., much the same as drug abuse resistance education actually increases people's propensity to take drugs. That's DARE. Remember DARE from the 80s and the 90s? Milwaukee itself was under a regime of reform, and these police departments have been under a regime of reform for years. And what did we get? We got a police officer in this case that had been accused of police brutality 17 times. There was a study having to do with Menlo Park, the Menlo Park Police Department. There was an attempt to reform them, failed for the same reasons. The police opposed it. A lot of police officers left. They didn't want to change their ways. And in general, it's very difficult to reform the police. It's almost impossible without putting in a lot of effort, which politically there's no will behind, and there's very little that can be done, because you'd have to be on the police case all the time. You'd have to restructure the political system that we have. Meaning, if you look at the mayor's office and the city council, they're on the side of the police. Okay, so you're not going to get reform that way. That is, shall we say, supervisory and comprehensive. That's not going to work. So what is going to work? So number one, there has to be a paradigm change. So what is the paradigm change? The paradigm change is that we view the police as being above human beings, above being the citizenry. And so what do I mean by that? If you're in the criminal justice system, you know that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And the state has to prove that someone committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. Now, why is that? Because we've decided as a society that we'd rather see guilty people walk than innocent people sent to jail or prison, than innocent people be behind bars, which would be an even more egregious miscarriage of justice, right? Well, when it comes to the police, I'm just going to shorten it for you, cut to the chase. We would rather see ordinary citizens hurt, maimed, killed, injured, destroyed, than see police officers hurt. That's just the way things are right now. And we're going to have to change that. We're going to have to err on the other side. And if policemen don't like that, then they shouldn't be policemen. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'll talk more about that in the future, but that's one thing. Number two, we're going to have to fix it so that if a police officer does break the law, there are real financial repercussions. The way it works right now, like the city of LA ran a multi-billion-dollar bond to cover their expenses because the police department lost multiple lawsuits. Okay, so they are actually costing the taxpayers billions of dollars every year. because they get their criminal defense paid for, their civil defense paid for in civil lawsuits. So what has to be the rule is, if you lose in a civil case, you have to pay that back. And if you lose the criminal case, Mr. Officer, you have to pay your own attorney's fees. And if there's anything outstanding, the union has to cover it. That's how it has to be, so that everyone's pension is on the line for that bad officer, that supposed bad apple. Everyone's got to be involved. So they have to police themselves, because otherwise they're going to lose out on their own pension. That's how it has to be if you want to see reform. If a police officer commits a crime, they get their pension. That cannot be touched. If they commit a crime and the defense of that crime in court, the state or the city will pay for their defense, will pay for their civil defense. If there's a payout because they lost the civil case, the city will indemnify them, so the city will pay that out. That's why there's a problem. We have to go after them personally, and they have to know, if they kill someone and they lose the case, they will be poor. That's the only method that you can use, really, that is practical. And you don't have to move heaven and earth to do that. You just have to, number one, change the paradigm a little, change the training, make it so that police officers are, and there's something else that goes along with that paradigm change, but make it so that police officers' well-being, their financial well-being, is at stake. One of the things that you can do, that I think there's a big difference between, one of the things you can do that goes along with changing the paradigm is how people are regularly, how they're charged with crimes is different than when the policeman is charged with a crime. So, for example, when you are charged with a crime, the state knows that a crime has been committed, and the impression in court is that a crime has been committed. And the state has to prove that you did it, that you had the requisite mental state, and that you committed the act that resulted in the crime. Okay? When you're dealing with a police officer, as a practical matter, the state has to prove not that this particular individual, this particular officer did it, because we all know who did it, it's a matter of public record, but rather that what this person did was an actual crime. So ordinarily, in a criminal prosecution, they're trying to prove that you did it. There's no doubt that there was a crime committed. They have to prove that you did it. But in the case of the police officer, they're not proving who did or who didn't do it. They literally don't know if it's a crime. And until you are clear that killing people at a traffic stop is unacceptable, until you are clear that you have to do everything in your power to save a person's life, that you cannot put somebody at risk at all for any kind of pressure on their system, or their circulatory or psychological. Everything has to be done to accommodate and de-escalate. If you don't do that, then you are putting yourself as a police officer above their safety. And as soon as you do that, then you're being unreasonable. That has to be the marker. There has to be a new marker that puts the onus on the police officer, the responsibility on the police officer. And that has to be a bright line which says there's no doubt at all that he did something wrong, that he committed a crime. And if you don't do it that way, then the police will always win these cases, or almost always win these cases. So that's what I mean by paradigmatic change. Finally, when you're in a situation and you are, let's say you're working for, there's a couple of different scenarios in the private world. Let's say you're working for Pep Boys, and someone accuses you, is it Pep Boys? Someone accuses you of stealing an auto part. Then you talk to loss prevention, and loss prevention gives you an interview, in which case they badger you, they interrogate you, They lie to you, all these things, and they tell you that everything's going to be a matter of public record and that everything can be used against you in a court of law. Or if you work for a corporation and you do something wrong, you have an interview with human resources, and they also tell you that everything's permanent. You can't have anything expunged off the record. Now, why is that? Because those institutions are private, okay? So those things can be used against you in a civil case or maybe a criminal case. When you're a police officer and you kill someone and Internal Affairs interviews you, what do you think happens to that record? Well, number one, that can't be used in a criminal case because the government is requiring the police officer to submit to a internal affairs or human resources, as it would be anywhere else, a internal affairs interview debriefing as a course in course of employment. The police department, aka the government, is requiring that interview. So therefore the government is coercing someone into spilling the beans. So if you use that internal affairs record in the court of law, you would be violating the defendant's constitutional rights. Okay, well, maybe that's unavoidable. Maybe you can't rewrite the Constitution to exempt the police. But here's the problem. Generally speaking, prosecutors do not use the internal affairs record to decide if that person needs to be prosecuted or not. So that's one of the reasons why it's rare to even get a prosecution, let alone a successful one. Because the people who decide to prosecute the police actually, as a court, I don't know how it works in your neck of the woods, but here in Southern California, you have two teams. One team of attorneys decide to prosecute, and the other team of attorneys look at the internal record, look at the internal affairs record. And the people who look at the internal affairs record are doing so for internal reasons. The people who do not have access to that, who do not have access to the internal affairs record, they are the ones who decide whether they should go ahead with the case or not. See how convenient that is? Just imagine if it worked that way for you. In fact, I don't think it works that way for anyone in any other capacity, even government employees. If you disclose something to the government in the course of employment and you're disclosing it to human resources in your department, of course it can be used against you. But the police, they've made this rule that it violates the police Sixth Amendment rights. So the thing is, either it should be allowed in court or it should be allowed to be used against a police officer in an internal disciplinary action, or at the very least in the decision-making process. But anyway, that's esoterica or not, a little bit off on a tangent. But those are the reforms that I would like to see. Now, people have been talking about defund the police, which is a very controversial issue. Philosophically, I don't oppose that. I just think it's fraught with problems. I actually support that, depending upon what the local community wants. I totally support whatever the local community and local activists want. But in terms of a national, cohesive, coherent policy that I think would work wonders within a couple of years, changing the tort system to actually apply to police officers on an individual level, changing the paradigm and the rule so that there is a bright line. If a police officer puts their own safety above a suspect's, now you're in trouble. You can't shoot someone in the back. Ever. The rule has to be that guns and the use of force, the rules that apply in terms of guns and the use of force, the rules that apply, for example, here's another thing you could do. The rules that apply to bounty hunters should be made to apply to the police. Because frankly, being a policeman statistically is a lot safer than actually than being a garbage collector. So that's what I mean. Change the paradigm so there's a bright line there, instead of the way that it is now, which is let's put the officer's safety ahead of everything else. And let's make it impossible to prosecute the police. And let's shield the police from any negative financial consequences. So that's my reaction to this case. Otherwise, this is going to keep happening. Sorry to bring anybody down, but that's my view on the subject. So, anyway, I hope that wasn't too comprehensive. And I hope this is the beginning of a dialogue between me and my viewers or whoever's listening, my friends. Thank you. Subscribe, share the video. Let's have a dialogue. And that's it for now. And I'll be in touch and make another video soon. Thank you.